Motion and a second to grant a leave of absence for Commissioner Lamb, who is out of town today.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. I'd like a motion and a second for approval of the minutes for the regular commission meeting of October 9th, 2024. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Good morning, Mr. Executive Director.
Good morning, Madam Commission President. Whew, booming voice this morning. Good morning, Commissioners. Very nice to see everyone. Full house today in large part because the last few rows are filled with new employees here at the port. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. I had the good fortune of spending some time with this cohort last week, and we just met with them again this morning. Just really excited to see everyone here. As we talked about this morning, it just feels like seeing fresh faces and energized faces from really diverse backgrounds is such an add for us. It just makes us better. And so it's just a thrill to have a new crop of joiners here today. I would like to recognize, if I could, on the board, the next slide, 4 safety champions for the month. Just again, 4 employees who have really focused on the safety of folks working on site, of their coworkers. Just as an example, Ethan helped set up a badging system that allowed only people who had gone through safety training onto the construction site to just keep that site safer for everyone. Just really appreciate Carrie and Renee and Todd as well. A bunch of different stories across security in the dredge and over here in the building right next to headquarters, just folks watching out for each other, for employees. So thanks to all of them this morning. We have a special visitor today. TJ Simoneau is first time here at Commission, manager of baggage handling system maintenance and T-Corps construction maintenance liaison for this month's safety message. TJ, if you'd come up here, that'd be great. I think, Commissioners, as you know, the baggage handling system is incredibly complex and expensive and requires constant vigilance, and it's got people moving in and around it all the time. So TJ is a total pro. Really great to have you here this morning. Thanks, TJ. Go for it.
Like Curtis said, TJ Simoneau, baggage handling manager and construction liaison here at the Port of Portland. Our baggage handling maintenance department has 19 craft members, 11 electricians, and 8 mechanics. And our crew is tasked with maintenance of the entire baggage handling system, as well as lighting in the terminal and concourses in the respect to relamping at least, and then take care of a few other niche systems around the terminal as well. Over the last 2 to 3 years, our department has been in a world of change with T-Corps going on and working essentially aside a new construction activity every day, which has presented lots of safety challenges. Obviously, every day when you go to your work site and it looks a little different, it poses a serious safety risk. And myself and our leads and our crew on a regular, weekly at most basis has gone back to the drawing board to evaluate communication processes and just work processes and what makes sense and what's the safest way to go about it being around construction. An example of this is just making pre-task planning on all our repairs the norm, prioritizing department leads, exposure to the rest of the crew to make sure that they have all the info and training they need to go home healthy every day. Our safety department here at the port goes above and beyond to maintain and improve on some key safety attributes. Some of the big ones are visible and committed leadership, engaged employee involvement, shameless incident and near miss reporting, and a tracking process for corrective action plans just to follow through and make sure that it's actually improving here. This all works with enough time, energy, and execution, and I believe our recent safety record reflects those efforts. Over the past 12 months, we've had 1 recordable injury in all of maintenance, which resulted in 0 lost time from work. 1 is too many. I think that's the culture here, but it's a nice number to improve on, and I'm confident that the safety culture here at the port, we'll continue to expand and improve on our fiscal 25 safety plan.
Perfect. Thanks, TJ. Appreciate you and the team. Honestly, 1 in 12 months is pretty astonishing, and I appreciate that we'll get to 0. But thanks so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
A few other items here this morning. I think, Commissioners, you've heard from me that we made a trip to visit our customers in Japan and Korea last month. Thank you, Commissioner Sampa, in particular, for joining Kimberly Branham and our team and I over in Seoul and in Tokyo and in, let's see, where else did we go? Nagoya, thank you, to see Toyota. I'm just thinking we went to too many places in too short a time. Just really productive, really great to reconnect, especially in the light of political changes. A lot of our business partners across the Pacific are concerned about what the future looks like. And it was reassuring to at least make the personal connection with them. Again, thank you, Commissioner Sampa, for joining. A couple good announcements here on federal investments at PDX. A shout out to our Senators Merkley and Wyden for really helping us acquire $3 million for improvements in the front of the airport around essentially the connectivity of the 30-year entrance to the 30-day-old internal PDX Next terminal core. Great $3 million grant to do airport infrastructure, and then also $2.77 million in clean marine funding to really help us decarbonize around our marine business and improve natural disaster resilience. Again, appreciate our delegation helping us acquire those federal funds. We've had some really great accessibility upgrades at PDX. I think when we talk about PDX Next, we get a little distracted by the shiny bauble of the gorgeous new terminal core, but there's been a lot of other great work around accessibility, working with partners on some features to help PDX get easier to navigate. More of PDX is now on Good Maps, a free audiovisual guidance app that helps travelers who are blind, low vision, deaf, or hard of hearing. So now the entire interior of the airport is mapped, including the new main terminal. With support of AARP and Travel Oregon, we installed a series of hearing loop systems in baggage claim, making it easier for passengers with hearing aids or cochlear implants to communicate with our staff by delivering clear, amplified sound in a busy area of the airport. And with the help of our friends at Alaska Airlines, we added a partial plane replica to our sensory room, which really enables folks who have neurodivergent or anxious traveler issues around getting on an airplane. They can get familiar with the look and feel of an aircraft before getting on. So really happy about that work and appreciate the team. For me, I guess for all of us on a more somber note, we've just been reflecting on the sad news of the passing of Bob Salinger, who many people on our team know personally. Bob was 30 years at Portland Audubon, then called Portland Audubon, but also engaged with us in numerous ways across the airport. He's just honestly a persistent and wonderful challenge and partner. He always had a funny joke and a bit of witticism, and I always found he was smarter than I was. He was just charming and funny and really cared about our community. He helped us develop our best-in-class wildlife program out on the airfield, worked with us at length around West Hayden Island, and really pushed us, I think rightly, to find a way to get West Hayden Island to stay green and to belong to the proper custodians of such a remarkable space. He'll just be missed. And I'll note, it turned out that Bob died from suicide. And I'd just like us all to note that there's hope and there's help. And 988 is a great phone number if folks are thinking about it or concerned about suicide. It's just a tragic loss for us and for Bob's family. So lastly, apologies, I adored Bob. He was a pain in my ass, but he was glorious. He was really great. And so it's hard to recognize his passing. Finally, Dan Pippinger, commissioners have in front of them a small piece of wood. Maybe if you would share the meaning of that piece of wood so they know what they're taking home with them.
Hey, you bet. Good morning, commissioners. This piece of wood is actually Oregon white oak, and it's the kind of wood that's same pieces that are used on the floor of the terminal core project. And they are produced by a company called Xenia Forest Products out of Rickreall, Oregon. Ben Doomling provided these to us, and they take these pieces of wood and they basically wire them to other ones. So it's like a bamboo sushi mat you can roll up and roll back, and that's how they install the floor. So working with the project to provide these, they're little, reminders, and the importance of them is in the naval services of the United States in particular, when you're the first crew on a commissioned warship, you're what's called a plank owner. It's a very special honor to commission a ship and be the first crew on it. And, planes are just ships in a different viscosity. And so I was reminded of, everybody at the port, no matter where they work, the commission, leadership, the frontline staff, all have participated in this terminal core project and take a lot of pride in it, whether they're directly working for the airport or not. And so we are providing one of these to every port employee and to each of you to just remember your role and the pride we all have in the work we've done at the Terminal Core Project and being a plank owner of the Terminal Core Project. So I hope you enjoy it, and you can use it for all sorts of things if you want. But it's really a special honor, and it's something certainly in the Navy and the Coast Guard of the United States. To be a plank owner is a very proud thing of the first commissioning of that ship. So,
Thank you, Dan. Bookmark? I don't know. There's some discussion amongst commissioners about, give us some examples of what it might be used for. A paperweight in very light wind.
Well, I did hear tongue depressor, and at maintenance we talked about using it as a shim for things as well. So, lots of different applications.
Okay. Lastly, as I see Travis, keep going, Travis. Don't stop now. I'm about to go there. Commissioners, when you leave this morning, we hope you'll leave with a special recognition that we've got for you on the table over here that Antoinette is going to tell you about. So all kinds of gifts this morning, I tell you. Yeah, please. Will you introduce yourself and Travis for the record?
Good morning, Commissioners. Antoinette Chandler, and this is Travis George, who heads up our Capital Finance and Treasury. In June, we were in front of you all asking for approval of the Series 30 financing, and I think I mentioned at that meeting that it was bittersweet because it was the end of having an opportunity, the privilege, I would say, to raise a couple $2 billion for the organization so that we could deliver what I will always say is the most transformational project, I think, in the world, but definitely for the state. And so what we wanted to do, and I want to give super kudos to Travis, we wanted to make sure that you all had just a little something to always be reminded of your support and your commitment to the organization. But I think more importantly, always looking back and saying, we did that together. And this is really, again, I'll just say transformational work on behalf of a lot of people in this organization. So Travis was very special in this process because we took a special effort to show you the roof. On the back, you see the back side, and it's pretty customary in financing transactions. I'm old school, so we used to call them tombstones, right? It's kind of the end of financing, but this is the lucite. So we hope that you all will enjoy this. You can use it as a paperweight if you want, because it's pretty heavy, but it's pretty special. And I just really appreciate all the work that Travis put into designing this with our banking partners. And you will see, if you look closely, the carpet's in there too. So enjoy.
Yeah. Thank you, Antoinette. Thank you, Travis. Appreciate you. You can pass that around, and then unless you don't want to take one with you, there's one for you over here on the side table. Commission President, those are the remarks for this morning. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Curtis. Any questions for Curtis? If not, can I get a motion to approve the Executive Director's report in a second? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We are moving on to public comments. And as always, I just want to reiterate the value that we place on hearing from the public. We appreciate your interest in the port, and your comments are indeed important to us. We have received written comments from a couple of individuals that are that were shared with the commission via email. And we have one person here today in person to testify and another individual virtually. So I think we would like to start, Mr. Lubischer, with you in person. Welcome. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
And one reminder, we do limit to 2 minutes. I will gently remind you when you hit your 2-minute mark.
I got that. Good morning. To summarize my written testimony, which you should have, G100 is the only FAA-approved unleaded fuel that can be used in all aircraft, fixed-wing aircraft, and rotary also, and is now available. California's Reed-Hillville Airport just received 7,500 gallons of G100 last week, and its cost is lower than HIO's current leaded fuel. There's no added infrastructure cost. Special incentives to pilots are not necessary as G100 lowers maintenance costs. The only incentive that we should be looking at is to stop the exposure of the children that live or go to school near the port's airport in Hillsborough. The port has stated, quote, "The port does not purchase aviation fuel. The port does not retail aviation fuel." There's no reason I can see why the port cannot purchase G100 and make it available at HIO. The language of section 47107A22 is not ambiguous. There is no need to wait for an interpretation from the FAA. Even the Eagle website supports that conclusion. The port can prohibit leaded fuel at HIO once G100 is available in the tank that is there waiting for it. Having there be a statewide acceptance of G100 is very laudable, but will delay the elimination of the lead-tainted air that the children that live and go to school near HIO are exposed to. I consider it an abdication of the port's responsibility to the children that live and go to school around the Hillsborough Airport that there should be a delay in prohibiting leaded fuel at HIO while working to ban leaded fuel throughout the state. The port mentions the big picture. I would hope that includes acting now to stop the lead exposure to our children in Hillsborough. In my written testimony, please utilize my reference to the cost of IQ loss, and also please also read Mr. Durden's article, which is well worth reading. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Lubischer. Appreciate it, as always.
Thank you.
And joining us virtually today is Mickey Barnes. Mickey, are you there? And good morning.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Good morning.
Oh, okay, I'm joining by phone. Thank you. Chair Koba, members of the commission, thank you for this opportunity to provide comments. At last month's Port Commission meeting, Steve Nagy stated that there were around 80, perhaps 84 plus public and private airports in Oregon. However, a review of the 2017 Environmental Protection Agency National Emissions Inventory lists 513 sources of lead in Oregon. Of that number, 419, 81.6% are airports. According to the Oregon Department of Aviation, there are 97 public airports in the state. 7 offer commercial airline passenger service. The majority of the remaining 92 are publicly subsidized non-revenue generating facilities that primarily serve private pilots, hobbyists, jet owners, charter services, and flight training schools. In addition, there are more than 300 private airports and airstrips located in Oregon. A search of the EPA NEI database for lead by county reveals that in 2017, there were 22 airports in Washington County, 16 in Multnomah County, and 35 in Clackamas County, a total of 73 airports just in the Tri-County area. I've included in my written comments a screenshot from the 2017 EPA NEI showing the top 10 sources of lead emissions in Oregon. Hillsborough Airport clinches the top spot with over 1,200 pounds of lead emissions, twice as much lead as the next three airports on the list. Bend Municipal ranks second with 592 pounds, followed by Troutdale at 554 pounds. Aurora with 540 pounds is fourth, and Scappoose Industrial Airport at 405 pounds is sixth. All of the above airports are the largest facility sources of lead in the counties in which they are located.
Ms. Barnes,
and
I'm
it's-
sorry to interrupt. It has been 2 minutes, so if you can come to conclusion, that would be terrific.
Okay, well, that was the last airport I wanted to mention is McMinnville, which is the second largest source of lead in Yamhill County. It ranks 10th on the list with 349 pounds. But thank you for hearing my testimony.
Thank you. We will move on to general discussion, and we have 2 items. First, I'd like to call, and hopefully I pronounce this correctly. If not, you can correct me, Nicoya Phillips up to help us recognize Native American Heritage Month. Good morning.
Yeah, what, Jen?
And Ms. Barnes, we can still hear you, so you may want to mute your
Oh,
phone.
thank you for telling me. I appreciate it.
Morning, and yes, you pronounced it correctly, Nicoya. Good morning, commissioners, fellow colleagues, any community partners that might be here or listening in. My name is Nicoya Phillips. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Community Impact Director for the Shared Prosperity Division here at the Port. I've been here about 1.5 years. It's been a fun ride so far. I really want to thank you for your time in the space today to share a little bit about Native American Heritage Month, which is November. We've been in this routine of a new tradition of sharing just a bit during the commission meeting, so very appreciative of the time. In addition to my role as the Community Impact Director, I'm also the coordinator for the Port's Tribal Relations Working Group, which is an effort as part of our Shared Prosperity Division as well. So one of the things that I thought would be really important for us to do today was to just share a little bit about our land acknowledgement. But there's a couple of things that feel important to share before that, which is the idea behind land acknowledgements in general stem from indigenous practices. It's common to acknowledge ancestors and place as part of ceremonies and gatherings, and organizations like ours often use them as a way to share our commitment to understanding the history of the lands that we occupy today. However, without meaningful actions that accompany the statements, we risk becoming performative and potentially damaging the relationships that we are working so hard to build with Indigenous peoples. So before I read our land acknowledgement today, I wanted to take the opportunity to uplift the current work and learning that's happening at the Port today, that many of our Port staff and the leadership are leading and supporting here. I apologize, I got a little frog in my throat. So hopefully many of you have heard about the work in PDX. So our PDX teams and our communications teams have been in partnership with Yakima Nation, Coquille Indian Tribe, Skokomish Indian Tribe, and the Cow Creek Band of the Umpqua Tribe of Indians. Thank you so much. Throughout the development of the new terminal project, our leadership, Curtis included, some of our other executives, broke bread with tribal leaders. They visited their homes and the forests where we sourced a lot of the lumber from and leaned into the opportunity for personal and organizational growth. What began as a transaction quickly evolved into cultural learning, storytelling, and the beginnings of a more meaningful relationship with tribes. Bridget Wheeler, the Executive Director of Programs and Services for the Coquille Indian Tribe, says, "To be able to go to Portland and have my kids see the impact of our ancestral homelands in that space and to connect with them, it just means a lot. It also means a lot to be recognized as a partner in these kinds of projects in the same way that private industries have been for so long." This month, the communications team will complete and install the wood origin maps and markers, and they'll be installed in the terminal to capture and tell the public the story of where tribal wood lives in our terminal today. Wildlife. We know birds and airports have a complicated relationship, and that's why we have one of the most coveted airport wildlife programs in the country. Red-tailed hawks. They're some of the most commonly spotted birds here at PDX year-round, and these birds, along with other species of raptors, for those who don't know, raptors is a birds of prey term. No dinosaurs on the airfield. Red-tailed hawks, though, are seen here at PDX year-round. Along with other species of raptors, they're also important to many indigenous cultures, and they're frequently depicted in art, the feathers commonly being used during ceremony. Hawks are often seen as symbols of grace, strength, power, freedom, courage. In some tribes, hawks are thought to be guardian spirits or spirit guides, and their appearance in flight considered a sign of good fortune. In some teachings, it's also said that the eagle is the one that flies the highest and closest to the creator, so seeing an eagle is a great blessing. Our wildlife team, led by Nick Atwell, has worked to honor these teachings through the capture and release of thousands of hawks and eagles. The developing relationship with the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs has allowed the team to bring these precious birds directly to Indian country after capture for a safer chance at life. Also pictured is the lamprey eel. Port staff participated in a learning session early this year with Gabe Shioships, the executive director of Friends of Tryon Creek. There we learned that the lamprey is one of 2 species of jawless fish that have roamed oceans and rivers for 340 million years. Lamprey, like salmon and sturgeon, are considered a first food, one of the foods that local tribes ate long before European contact. They were once abundant in the Columbia River, but in the past 70 years, the numbers have been dropping, a result of dams blocking their path upstream. Local tribes, federal, state, and other agencies are coming together to help restore Pacific lamprey, installing passage structures and moving them to areas where they used to live, upstream of the dams along the Columbia. Our friends at Metro encourage us to visit the lamprey exhibit, developed in partnership with tribes at the Oregon Zoo. And art. So across our art program here at the Port, our communications team, our community impact teams, we have multiple art projects and committees that include Indigenous members, each using different approaches to develop beautiful new projects for PDX that tell the stories of Indigenous people, life, and place here near the Columbia. These pieces will build on our existing program, which includes the entry to this very room, our Chinook conference room doors. These doors, completed by artists Tony A. Johnson and Adam McIsaac, are contemporary work based on traditional Chinookan symbolic carvings and artistic traditions. Although recognizably part of an overall Pacific Northwest Indigenous artistic tradition, Chinookan art is distinct to the lower Columbia River region and quite recognizable with specific design elements. I encourage you to just spend a little bit of time with them, especially the iron handles are just really incredible pieces of work that people talk about around the city. And finally, our Tribal Relations Working Group that I mentioned earlier. In February 2024, we launched this group. It's made up of staff across divisions. It's a joint effort between the Community Impact, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, and Government Affairs teams. The purpose of the group is to create a community of learning and practice for staff whose work will interact with Indigenous people and tribes. Our incredible members are an interdisciplinary group who are a mixture of enrolled tribal members and staff whose work touches the priorities of tribes and Indigenous people. Some just want to take part in the learning opportunities. Our late tribal relations consultant, Kurt Lynham, he's pictured there on the right, was really the beginning stages of the work group. He was essential in the early learnings where we talked much about tribal history and sovereignty until his untimely passing in April of 2024. The group continues to meet regularly and engage in experiential learning, peer support, and relationship building opportunities with tribes. On November 1st, for a serendipitous kickoff to Native American Heritage Month, we took a day trip to Grand Ronde where we were hosted by David Harrelson, Cultural Resources Manager for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. That picture is there above. Our efforts are going to be ongoing. They'll continue to evolve, but we're really proud of these projects and applaud our Port's leadership for the commitment and continued investment into this important work. And with that, I'd like to read our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the Port of Portland is located on lands that have been occupied and stewarded since time immemorial by people from the Cascade, Clackamas, and Multnomah bands of the Chinook tribe. Many other indigenous peoples have their homes in, travel through, harvest, and use the plentiful natural resources of the Columbia River, Willamette River, and the other lands and waters within the Ports District. The Port of Portland respects the history of the federally recognized sovereign tribal nations of the Northwest, whose people were forcibly dispossessed and removed from their homes and lands by the United States government following treaties entered into between 1851 and 1855. And we are committed to recognizing the ongoing relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and these places. So as I close, I appreciate your patience. I wanted to bring your attention to yet another gift. Y'all are getting all the gifts today. So we brought some special treats for you all over here. So we've got some fry bread. So if you're open to carbs at this point in your journey, it's a really tasty treat. So fry bread is a staple food for many Indigenous people. It originated as a survival food during the mid-19th century when the U.S. government forcibly relocated tribes to reservations. This forced them to rely on government rations of flour, salt, lard, and baking powder, which they used to create fry bread as a means to sustain themselves when traditional food sources were unavailable. Because of its origins as a survival food during difficult time, fry bread holds significant cultural meaning for many Indigenous communities, representing their resilience, ability to adapt, and to persevere. This fry bread is from a local Native-owned company called Sisters Fry Bread, who does some catering. And then the last thing is just a little opportunity for you all. This month, I'm going to encourage you to check out the Land of the Ports display. So it talks about the history of the port and the land here. It's in the South Tunnel. It's an artistic display that's installed there. I want to encourage you to find opportunities to get to know our 4 partners, the tribes that help build the new terminal, and then any other opportunities to support Native-owned businesses. And with that, thank you so much.
Nicoya, thank you very much. That was terrific and really appreciate the land acknowledgement as well. Any questions, comments? All right, thank you. Thanks for sharing. Antoinette, top that, would you, with an audit report?
I have no bread. Okay, all good. Good morning, commissioners. I'm going to have Bob and Ashley come up. And David. So commissioners, each year the port is required under state statutes, our bond ordinances, and federal guidance for grants to have audits performed on our books and records. We're here today to present to you the results of our fiscal 24 audits, and we're joined here from your left, my right, our controller, Bob Burkett, and Ashley Osteen, our engagement partner with Moss Adams, and David Levitsky, Moss Adams audit manager. So Bob will review for you our 24 results, and then we'll turn it over to our partners at Moss Adams to present their audit results and the required communications.
Thanks. Who is that young fella up there on the screen? So good morning. We're here today to present to you the Port's annual audit reports, of which there are 3 that you should have received copies of. We'll also give you a brief overview of our financial results for 2024, and our external auditors will present to you their reports and required communications for the audits they performed. We'll start with a we'll start with a brief review of some of the information in each of the audit reports, and then I'll turn the presentation over to Moss Adams. I feel like I'm right on the fringe of where I need to be. So next slide, please. So starting with financial results, we have income statement data for PDX, comparing revenues and expenses for the fiscal years 2024 to 2023. And on the first line, you can see our operating revenues increased by over $40 million compared to fiscal 23, due largely to passenger counts They were higher in fiscal 24 than 23, and it really drove higher revenues across all of our passenger-dependent revenue streams. In 24, we had 16.7 million passengers, and in 23, we had 15.6 million. On the next line, our operating expenses, excluding depreciation and amortization, they were also up in fiscal 24 by about $24.5 million. Again, primarily due to higher operating costs associated with that higher passenger activity. Our depreciation and amortization expense is up $14.3 million year over year. As we continue to work on the T-Core family of projects, some of those projects have come online, but with the opening of phase one at the beginning of fiscal 25, we will see a significant increase in this line for next year. Our non-operating income is up just over $34 million year over year because of higher interest income, as well as the fact that we drew the balance of our federal ARPA COVID relief funds during the year. Those increases are slightly offset by the first full year of interest expense on our Series 29 bonds. But the bottom line is a solid increase in net income to $72.4 million in fiscal 24, due to both stronger operating and non-operating results. Next slide, please. So here we've added the year-end balances for assets, liabilities, and net position. Net position is just the mathematical difference between assets and liabilities, and you'll sometimes hear it referred to as equity or net worth. But you can see our total assets increased by over $65 million during the year, largely driven by that net income. Our total liabilities have decreased slightly, and that improved the net position for the port by $80.2 million. Next slide. And now at the bottom, we've added PDX's unrestricted cash and investments. These are available for any lawful airport purpose, and they increased by nearly $79 million in fiscal 24, again, primarily due to net income. For more information on our fiscal 24 performance, I'd point you to the management's discussion and analysis, starting on, I think, about page 6 of any of these reports. Actually, page 3. It's 6 pages starting on page 3. It's comprised of tables and discussion that go deeper into the details behind our fiscal 24 results. So next slide. So now we'll move on to some high-level income statement data for the general fund. In the reports you have, you'll see general fund referred to as marine and other. They are one and the same. Fiscal 24 operating revenues are up about $10 million versus the prior year. This was primarily attributable to higher land sales in fiscal 2024, offset in part by lower container revenues due to the lower volumes at Terminal 6. Our operating expenses, excluding depreciation and amortization, are actually down $7 million versus the prior year. This was due to the lower longshore labor expense at T6, lower environmental expenses, and lower overhead costs, offset in part by higher salaries and higher cost of property sold associated with the fiscal 24 land sales. Our depreciation and amortization expense remained relatively flat year over year, while our non-operating income was up nearly $20 million. That increase was primarily due to higher interest income and the receipt of a settlement during the year. And the bottom line result of all this was a positive net income of $42.1 million for the general fund in fiscal 24. Next slide. So here's the balance sheet information again, assets, liabilities, and net position. You can see that assets increased by about $48.3 million, while liabilities decreased by 3.4, which led to a net position increase of $51.7 million in fiscal 24. This was due to the positive net income, as well as capital grants and transfers from PDX to fund general aviation capital. Next. And now at the bottom of the slide, we have the unrestricted cash and investments for the general fund, which was up $44.6 million in fiscal 23, or over fiscal 23. And again, attributable to net income, capital grants, and transfers from PDX. So next slide. And now we'll move on to the report of federal awards. this slide recaps some of the information in that report regarding expenditures of federal awards. You can see on the first line that our total expenditures of federal awards increased significantly from fiscal 2023 to fiscal 2024. And then the details of larger federal awards on the next three lines show the primary areas where the port received that federal funding. The FAA Airport Improvement Program pays for capital improvements at the airport. We incurred $4.7 million more in grant eligible spending during fiscal 24 than we did in the prior year. Year over year fluctuations on this line are really driven by the nature and the timing of the projects that we are undertaking in a given year and their eligibility for federal funding. On the next line, you can see that during the pandemic, the port was awarded CARES, CARISA, and ARPA funding, all the COVID relief programs. And in fiscal 24, we drew the balance of remaining funding. So we have drawn everything that we're allocated. So that just the drawing of that money attributes or accounts for the increase in that line. And on the last line, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers dredging line, that's our reimbursable contract for maintenance dredging of the Columbia River. While not a grant, it's technically considered a federal award for the purposes of this report. And fluctuations on this line really are attributable to the Corps' desire to have us perform work and the amount of federal funding that they receive. Next slide. And the last report we've given to you is the Passenger Facility Charge Report, which we generally refer to as PFCs. And PFCs are that $4.50 per ticket charge assessed on in-plane passengers collected by the airlines and remitted to the airport to pay for FAA-approved projects. That report starts with the same information as the other two reports, but starting on page 44, information specific to the PFC program is included, as is Moss Adams' report on compliance and internal control over compliance related to the FAA's PFC program. So you can see that our PFC collections were up almost $4 million as we saw modest employment growth during the year. The small amount of interest that we earn on our PFCs was up versus the prior year, largely due to a higher interest rate environment. And our PFC expenditures were significantly up over the prior year because in addition to paying for bonds debt service during the year, in fiscal 2024, we also spent PFCs on eligible TCOR construction costs. So that concludes my review of the reports. So I'll pause in case there are any questions.
Any questions for Bob? Commissioner Johnson, I'm so surprised.
Couple of questions, and it's kind of two-part around depreciation. Mm-hmm. What's the kind of the general guidance on kind of depreciation start dates? I heard you kind of say TCOR is going to start depreciation at the beginning of the year. So in general, for these kinds of capital projects, what's the guidance?
So it's substantial completion when we place the asset in service. So even if the project's not completed, we begin booking depreciation at the point in time when we place that asset into service. And then we'll go through, close that project out. And if there's any true up, we'll do that at project closeout. But it begins as soon as we start using the asset.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. And the second part of that is, as you get federal funding and grants for capital improvements, are those part of kind of your depreciation forecast?
The capital grants, the way we record those is directly to net position.
Okay.
So that funding comes in, we gross up the cost of the asset. So if we spend $10 million, if it's a $10 million asset, we record $10 million on the books.
Okay.
And depreciate that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions from the commission?
All right. Well, I will turn it over to Moss Adams. Okay. Ashley and David, take it away.
Good morning, commissioners. If you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. Just a reminder, my name's Ashley Austin. I'm a partner with Moss Adams, and I'm joined here today by David Levitsky. He's a manager and has been on the port's engagement for a number of years now, but he assumed the manager role this year. And It's always nice to have someone come join me in these types of meetings. So excited that he's here today. Go to the next slide, please. So we'll go through our auditor opinions and reports, and then we'll talk a little bit about where we focused our audit, some areas of audit emphasis. Of course, focus most of the presentation on our required communications, and then talk a little bit about some GASB standards that are going to come online over the next couple of years. Go to the next slide. And the next slide. A filler slide. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so this slide talks about 3 of the auditor reports that were issued. I'll go from top to bottom here. The first report is that we issued an unmodified opinion. That means that your financial statements are fairly presented in accordance with U.S. generally accepted accounting principles. That's what you want to hear. It's the cleanest, the highest level of assurance that you can receive. The second opinion on the slide is related to the fact that the port is an Oregon municipal corporation, so you have specific items that you have to comply with, things like budget adoption, your procurement process, investments, insurance. It has a lot of different compliance requirements, and we look at all those items throughout our audit, focusing the majority of our efforts on the budget adoption process and procurement. If we had any control findings or compliance findings, things like if the port had an over expenditure, that would land in this report. But as you can see, there were no control findings and no compliance findings for 2024. And the third report is on our government auditing standards report on internal control. And that's just focused on if there are any financial reporting findings or any compliance findings, those would also be included in this report. So if you had a significant deficiency or a material weakness in your financial close and reporting process, which typically arises when we have a significant audit adjustment that's identified, which didn't happen this year, that would land in this report. But as you can see, there's no financial reporting findings and no compliance findings. So clean reports all around. You go to the next slide. We issue 2 additional reports. The first one on the top of the slide is related to our single audit, so the audit of federal expenditures that Bob went over. We pick a major program. That was the Airport Improvement Program this year. All of the federal expenditures related to the improvement at the airport, about $50 million. Those dollars, because they're federal in nature, are subject to a lot of different compliance requirements, whether the costs that you're incurring are allowable, if you're reporting timely, if you're managing your contractors with wage rate requirements. Those are just a sample of the things that we look at. And the materiality level there is really low. If anything is over 50 cents, we have to look into it. So it's very compliance driven. As you can see, there were no control findings and no compliance findings. So clean opinion there. And then the last report that we issue is on the compliance with the requirements applicable to the passenger facility charge program. Again, there's compliance requirements that you have to comply with and no control findings and no compliance findings that we identified and reported on. Of course, it takes me a couple of minutes to report on that, and I say it every year, but it takes management all year to receive clean opinions. So would like to give some kudos to management as well. If you go to the next slide. And the next slide, David's going to take us through the areas of audit emphasis.
Thank you, Ashley. So this slide and the next one will cover areas where we focus most of our time in on the audit, whether we deem them to be a higher risk or just they had significant balances where we had to perform more work. So the first one on the list is the internal control environment. As Ashley mentioned, we did issue a report on internal controls. So we had to spend some time looking through all business cycles of the port to verify they're in compliance and the internal controls are being operated effectively. As you'll see on the list, common theme, a lot of these other areas are areas where we had we focused our audit on as part of our audit emphasis. And then moving on to management estimates. Estimates involve significant amount of judgment, so they can be a little riskier area for us to focus on. So we look at things as the environmental remediation liability, legal contingencies, depreciation, the allowance for doubtful accounts, and the discount rate used in the lease receivable. We also focus a significant amount of time on the net pension liability. We verify the rates and amounts back to source documents. We look at the the liability amounts, making sure they're recorded appropriately with the outflows and inflows. And we also do testing over new hires to verify their eligibility is in accordance with the policy. For bond activity, we confirm any new debt issue. There was no debt funding, although there was one debt agreement taken out that we confirmed. We review the discounts and premiums, making sure those are amortized correctly and within policy, and make sure that the port is in compliance with all its covenants. For capital assets, there's a large amount on the port side. We perform testing of any new capital assets as we would for the T-Corp project, any other additions for construction in progress. And then we will also look at any asset disposals or retirements, any land sales, and of course look at depreciation as well. Moving on to revenue, we perform a large analysis over revenue, tying it to business indicators or other outside factors. For an example, for the marine side, we'll look at rail car movement or ship movement to determine if revenue is appropriately recorded in terms of those factors. And on the airport side, we would look at enplanements and deplanements of passengers. We also performed procedures over PFC revenue as part of our PFC audit, and then over the federal grants as part of our single audit. Next slide, please. Leases and subscription-based information technology arrangements. These are kind of grouped into one area. They came on board as new standards in the last couple of years. Management spent a significant amount of time implementing them, and then we had to tailor our audit approach for these items. This is the first year where neither of these items are new, so we moved our audit emphasis from testing the implementation to more looking at the completeness of the populations to verify there are no leases or IT arrangements that are missed and that should have been recorded on the financial statements. For net position, we look at the classifications of the unrestricted, restricted, and net investments in the capital assets to verify they're properly recorded. And as touched upon in the internal controls, we also look at the IT side of internal controls to make sure we can rely on all the reports management produces and that we don't have to do any further audit procedures of the completeness and accuracy of those reports. Ashley also touched upon our single audit and the report we issued there that we looked at the airport improvement program, which was a majority of all federal expenditures that were received in fiscal year 24. And every year we incorporate a unpredictability procedure. This year we looked at the check register and did additional procedures over it, and we did not identify any items there. And I'll pass it back to Ashley.
All right, go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So now we'll kind of launch into our required communications with those charged with governance, which is this group. If you go to the next slide, this just describes our responsibility under our professional standards, both generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards. Of course, it's just to express our opinion on the financial statements, make sure that they're fairly presented in accordance with GAAP. That's the only thing that Moss Adams owns in that packet that Bob provided to you. It doesn't relieve you of your responsibilities. We do perform our audit in accordance with our professional standards to obtain reasonable, not absolute assurance. So we're not auditing every dollar, testing every transaction. We're just making it, we do set a materiality and we abide by that. We do consider internal control over financial reporting and use it as a basis for designing our audit procedures. And then we communicate findings that, of course, in our judgment are relevant to your responsibilities in overseeing the financial reporting process and administering those federal awards. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So we did perform our audit in accordance with the plan, scope, and timing that was communicated to the commission officers during our entrance meeting back in June. This would be our opportunity to let you know if there were any changes to the plan, the scope, or the timing, but we set out to issue by the end of October. We performed field work as we had originally planned. There were no changes. The next box is, of course, there are significant accounting policies that are used by the port. They're described in the footnotes to the financial statements. I think it's either note 1 or note 2. That's how the organization records all of their significant accounting transactions. So if you're only going to read one footnote, that would be the one to read. During the year, the port did adopt GASB 100, which is around accounting changes and error corrections. There were no adjustments to the port's financial statements as a result of the adoption of that as a result of the adoption of that standard, but they did indicate that they adopted it appropriately. And we reviewed all the disclosures and deemed them to be consistent and appropriate. Management judgments and accounting estimates, as David already alluded to, we did test those management judgments and estimates, including the environmental remediation liability and any litigation, et cetera. We spend a substantial amount of time on those particular management estimates, but we deemed them all to be reasonable and didn't have any adjustments as a result of our audit procedures. If you go to the next slide. I mentioned the financial statement disclosures, and we like to call out those disclosures that we think are significant to financial statement users. So note 1 was the one that I mentioned, summary of significant accounting policies. Note 6, leases, that describes all of the leases for which you are the lessor. So big lease receivable on your books, it's a significant financial statement note. Note 7, long-term debt. Of course, there's quite a bit of long-term debt outstanding. And then note 12, commitments and contingencies, describes those environmental remediation liabilities that we discussed earlier. There were no difficulties encountered during our audit. That would be something that we had trouble getting some information. We had trouble accessing individuals who we wanted to talk to. There were no things of that nature this year. And then corrected and uncorrected audit adjustments. There were no adjusting journal entries that were identified. So an adjusting journal entry, management provides us the trial balance. We use that to perform our audit procedures. If we had identified an adjustment that was over our set threshold, we would be required to share that with you if they elected to post it. Or if it was material, they would be required to post it to receive a clean opinion. No adjusting journal entries. There was one small proposed adjustment related to the land held for sale. You had a land sale this year. We have a difference in methodology, management does, with Moss Adams. It's been ongoing since the port has been a client. When there is a land sale, there's typically a proposed audit adjustment to either increase or decrease that cost of property sold and adjust the land held for sale. Pretty small dollar amounts here. It was to increase land held for sale for about $520 and increase cost of property sold by $640, and then increase net position by $1.16 million. We deemed it immaterial. It's above our findings threshold, so we're required to communicate it to you, but management decides to pass on it, and we are okay with that. Go to the next slide. Hand it back to David.
Thank you. So, as we discussed, there's significant estimates around the legal liabilities that the port has. So the port is subject to potential legal proceedings and claims. We reviewed those and we are not aware of any, or excuse me, all those that we are aware of are disclosed in the notes on the financial statements. We had no disagreements with management, whether how they applied an estimate or accounting policy. And we did not identify any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal controls. Next slide, please. We are not aware that management had any consultation with other accountants for accounting or auditing matters. Outside of the contracts, the agreed upon procedure engagement letters, and the management representation letters for the financial statement and the PFC audit, there have been no other significant communications, and we are not aware of any material uncertainties or events and conditions. Next slide, please. And lastly, we're not aware of any instances of fraud or non-compliance with laws and regulations. And then next slide, and I'll pass it back to Ashley.
And then if you just go to one more slide, there's just 4 new accounting standards that are coming online over the next 2 years. The first 2 will be adopted by the port in 2025. That relates to compensated absences. So if you don't pay out your sick leave, you still have to account for it, and there will be potentially a liability that is recorded related to the sick leave that's used because it accumulates and it's earned by an employee. So management is likely to do an analysis to determine what the effect is on the port's financial statements. Certain risk disclosures is just a disclosure only standard. It relates to if there are any material items that could impact the port significantly in the next year. So, for example, if you had a major property taxpayer leave the state and that had a significant, I know you don't receive a ton of property taxes, but just bear with me in this example. If you had a major property taxpayer leave the state and that was going to significantly impact your specific financial statement situation, that would be a disclosure. If you had a major airline that left, that's a better example. If Alaska Airlines left, that would be something that you would need to disclose here. GASB 103 has some various changes to financial reporting, some things in the MD&A, some things around operating measures in the enterprise fund, which the ports reports on. We'll have to evaluate those as the runway comes down to 2026 when that needs to be adopted. And then disclosure of certain capital assets, that's clarifying how those capital assets are being disclosed. And we'll, of course, look into that with management as we get closer to adoption. If you go to the next slide, that includes our contact information. Both myself, Lori Tisch is a concurring partner. She's the partner that reviews both the financial statements and some audit adjustments, items that we make decisions on in our file. You can contact her too, but please contact me if you have questions. And then David's contact information is also included. And that concludes what we had to present here today, but would open it up for any questions that you all had.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, David. Commissioners, questions for either Moss Adams or for Bob? Counting on you. Commissioner Sampat.
So this is a clarifying question, David. There was one slide where you mentioned that you audit IT systems, including for security. Now, are these IT systems that are used for financial reporting, or are these IT systems that go beyond financial reporting?
These are IT systems that are for financial reporting directly. Any numbers derived that would flow into the financial statements.
Okay. Yeah. And has there been a significant change in the IT systems over the last 12, 24 months? Or
they've been consistent.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Luther, good. All right. Thank you very much. We appreciate it as always. We especially like no findings. Consent items. We have 2 consent items today. Does any commissioner want a presentation of either one of the consent items? Okay, I will read the titles. Number 1 is readoption of commission policy number 6.1.2, investments. And number 2 is Hillsborough Enterprise Zone boundary amendment. Can I get a motion and a second for approval of the consent items, please? So moved. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we're moving to action items. We have 3 agenda items under action items. The first one is adoption of the fiscal year 24-25 Executive Director Performance Objectives. And commissioners, you've had a chance to see draft versions of these objectives and provide input. So Curtis, if you want to quickly run through it,
Sure.
And then we can see if there's any additional comments or questions.
Terrific. Thank you, President Koba. If we could go to the next slide, I'll just run. Commissioners, as you'll recall, these objectives are, while you are holding me accountable for delivery, they're effectively a proxy for the organization of the big items that we're up to this year as an organization. Obviously, there are many other things going on inside the port, but these are those ones that you have indicated are important and should be a priority. They are categorized in the 4 areas of our strategic plan, essentially PDX, the movement of goods, creation of quality jobs, and an equitable and inclusive culture. So this is the first one, essentially 2 items around PDX. First, manage the opening of phase 1 and the transition through phase 1 and the impact of phase 1 on passenger travel. And 2, to create an aviation division business plan consistent with our strategic plan. Second, if you would, the next slide. The movement of goods and services, 3 items here. One, work on advancing our strategy to keep the dredging of the 100 miles of the Columbia from Portland to the ocean sustainable. That includes financing support from the state of Oregon for dredge placement. Second, resolving the issues around T6. I know we've all spent a lot of time here. Our push here in these performance objectives is to get to resolution of those issues. Honestly, that's an up or down. Obviously, we prefer that to be a thumbs up, but really to push toward resolution. And then third, really lead on a funding and settlement strategy for Portland Harbor, in particular around Swan Island, which is, I think we all know, is the biggest, most challenging element of the Lower Willamette Plan. Third, if you would, the next slide. Creating quality jobs and generational wealth and access to equitable and inclusive economic development. A focus here on Terminal 2, the mass timber housing project, and on deepening our coalition building and relationship building in East County to really develop our East Multnomah County strategy with folks who live there and in the region. Lastly, next slide, our work on being an equitable and inclusive culture, a target around Q2 of this coming year for the PDX Workplace Initiative. As folks know, we've been really working on a healthcare standard with key PDX partners. We'd like to finish that by the second quarter. It's been in development, and I feel good about that one, but it has been a bit bumpy with a lot of different players. We're getting there. And then lastly, an organizational learning and development strategy. We've talked about this. Thank you, commissioners, for your input on this one. Really pushing on getting an LD strategy out for our employees to help develop their own careers and professional development internally. So, Madam President, I'm happy to talk about any of those. I think, as you noted, commissioners have seen these objectives, but appreciate the engagement and addition of some elements, honestly, that I think for me and the executive team were important to recognize that commissioners had as a priority that we might not have elevated. So appreciate the conversation around this list.
Any additional questions or comments on the executive director's performance objectives? All right, we're good.
Okay, appreciate it.
All right, super. Thank you. Thanks for the effort and time to work through all the comments and include them in the document. If I could have a motion and a second. All those in favor of adopting the fiscal year 24-25 executive director performance objectives, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And Pippinger, next agenda item.
I wanted to make sure the person who knew what they were talking about was going to be up here with me.
She's here. Any fry bread for you before we
Yeah. Good morning, commissioners. This item is to request your approval to enter into a concessions lease agreement with 2 companies that were successful bidders in our concession retail lease program. Michelle Campbell is here to present it. She's the concession development manager who led the process. And before I turn it over to her, I just wanted to remark on how impressed I am that, you know, this is concession retail. It's like news and gift is kind of the term we use, but building in local concepts to that program, and then also being really thoughtful about what our employee base here at the airport needs, especially those that are here 24 hours a day, you know, working shift work at night and all the different weather conditions. I'm just really pleased with kind of the integration instead of just kind of a standard news and gift that you might find in an airport. These are really unique, I think, opportunities and partnerships with local business, and they really serve our PDX employee base well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Matt? Okay. Good morning. I'm pleased to be here today to request approval to execute concession lease agreements with the 2 successful proposers for the recent convenience retail concession solicitation. Before I begin, though, there are a few of our business partners out here that I would like to introduce, please. We have Pamela Brown from Paradies Lagadier.
Good morning.
And then we have two of the joint venture representatives that are with Marshall Retail Group. We have Joyce Attar of Came to Eat, and we have Malia Seiko of Brookwest Ventures. Next slide, please. So back in April, a request for proposals was issued for the entire convenience retail program at PDX. Convenience retail units are high volume and they carry a wide variety of inventory. Passengers often make purchases to carry on board their flights, and employees frequently make purchases during their break periods. The previous RFP was for convenience retail was issued in 2010, and the current business partners have been operating since then. This RFP included a total of 9 locations and broke the program down into 2 packages, one with 4 units and one with 5 units. Next slide, please. Notice about the upcoming RFP was sent through Planet Bids to everyone registered under the all concession categories. Information about the upcoming RFP and the overall concessions program was shared with interested parties, and meetings took place virtually and on site. Direct outreach was also made to experienced companies who operate convenience retail and other airport locations. There were multiple goals for this RFP, but overall, the port was looking for 2 experienced and financially stable businesses to design, construct, and operate multiple units at PDX. Even though we were looking for an experienced large operator, clear expectation was set during outreach and in the RFP itself to incorporate local and regional brands in all aspects of the proposal. It was a priority that they were a quality employer who would engage in the local community. And it was also important that the concepts enhance the airport experience, provide a high level of customer service, and optimize revenues for the port. Next slide, please. An evaluation team chosen to provide a variety of perspectives reviewed the proposals and selected the successful proposers based on the evaluation criteria shown here. This criteria follows along the same lines as other recent concession RFPs. PDX Quality Employer Plan, Shared Prosperity, and Small Business all totaled 35% of the overall score. And the small business team set the ACDB participation level target at 20%. Next slide, please. So for the outcome, the Marshall Retail Group was awarded Package 2 as the highest ranked proposer. They recently opened Hello from Portland in TCOR Phase 1, and they also operate In Motion. A few key points from their proposal I wanted to share. Marshall commissioned an independent passenger study to better understand the demographics, behaviors, and preferences of the passenger here at PDX. They used that information to develop the themes and the product assortment. That's something that we hadn't seen before, so it was exciting to see. In terms of the ACDBE, they came in with 30% participation with 3 joint venture partners, and all 3 are 100% women-owned. They will implement a 2% profit share program split evenly with all of their PDX employees, and that includes their teams at Hello from Portland, as well as In Motion. The second highest ranked proposer was the Paradies Shops. They were awarded Package 1. They are one of PDX's current convenience retail partners. A few key points from their proposal. Paradies will implement a 10% profit share with hourly employees. And in their proposal, they shared that it was the rent structure that was very favorable that allowed them to offer this profit share program to their employees. They will be hosting ACDB certification workshops for new local vendors and suppliers run by a local attorney and facilitated by Paradies. And their proposed concept for a pre-security location includes a 24-hour operation which will provide an accessible late night option for both employees as well as passengers. Next slide, please. For key business terms, I just wanted to mention a couple. Convenience retail RFPs often bid rent, which just puts rent up to the highest bidder. PDX didn't take that approach. We crafted a rent structure that was favorable to both the port as well as the proposers. So we chose a tiered rent structure for the post-security locations, and each year that will reset back to 18%. For the pre-security locations, it's 10% of gross revenues. So gross sales are forecasted for the first year for about 30 million, which would be estimated 6 million to the port in revenue. And to put that into perspective, in fiscal year 24, the 16.7 million was the restaurant retail total revenue to the port. Of that, 4.7 million was from convenience retail, so about 28%. And then moving to the improvements, the tenants are forecasted to be spending between the two of them for all units approximately $11 million for all of their build outs. Next slide, please. So then we come to schedule. I'm here today in front of Commission with the recommendation requesting approval. And if approved, lease execution will take place this month as well. And then over the next year, we'll have design, permitting, and construction, and looking for the T-Core Phase 2 units to be open with the current schedule of Q1 2026. Next slide, please. So I request approval to enter into the concession lease agreements as recommended. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate it. Any questions? Comments? Commissioner Johnson.
Is the schedule iterative whereby there's multiple locations, so all locations will complete at that point, or will there be locations open sooner?
Great question. We'll work with the concessionaires during our pre-design review. Marshall Retail Group has suggested that they would like to open all 4 of their locations at once, so that would be Q1 2026. And Parodies will work with them to see. They are the current operator here. Their lease term goes until June of 2025. And then they'll most likely continue during their build out and transition those in as they go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Can I have a motion and a second? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion for the convenience retail concession leases passes. Thank you. Thank you to our partners too.
Thank you very much.
Our last agenda item is Vince Granato and crew.
Good morning. We've been here a few times to talk about T-Core, but we haven't asked for approval for anything for a while. So we have 2 contract amendments that are here today. But George and I were talking, I think we've asked 34 times.
When you said a few times, oh, come on.
I think it's been 34 times that we've been here asking for approval. And I don't think any of the commissioners that are currently here were actually here when we very first came. It's been about 7 or 8, more than that, years ago. I can't remember exactly. So we thought 2015. So 9 years ago is when we had our first request. So we thought we'd go backwards a little bit and just talk a little bit about some of the high level goals and what we set out to do. And then show you a little bit about obviously what we have achieved, and it's been a pretty good story. So if we can move forward to the next slide, and then we'll let George ask for the formal approval. So when we went back here in 2015, these were the goals that we had. And you can see them all up there. I'd say the flexibility of the terminal was really one of the big things. We had very little of that in the old terminal from what we were faced to deal with, given how it was put together, and then obviously the seismic resiliency that we were going to need going forward as well. So those were some of the first goals that we had. If you can move to the next slide. And so then we put together our guiding principles, and these were the ones that were really important for us that, even back then in January, of 2018, we had a sense of where we were headed with these. It really, I'd say they blossomed over time as we worked closely with our partners about the experience and the design that came forward. And as we were moving through it, we learned so much from everybody that we were working with, and I don't think we could have truly envisioned exactly how far we would be able to go with the art, the architecture, the design, the local building, and just so grateful for the partners that we had that really opened our minds to what could truly be done here. And so, but these were what we stuck to, and whether it was EGF, the Hoffman Skanska team, any of the subcontractors, they were the ones that really helped us achieve this, and it was kind of our guiding principles and our rock that really got us where we wanted to go. The next slide then. So this was a vision that we had in March of 2020. So we're going to show us kind of what the renderings were way back then, and then some pictures of what we actually did achieve. So our initial vision that ZGF came up with was this. So 4 years ago, and the next slide then will show in September what it was also going to look like from the rendering. And I think the next one then will show what we actually did. And pretty good representation of what we set out to do. And I think everybody's felt, obviously the results have been great and people have been very pleased with it. If we can go to the next slide, just some more renderings of what the ticket lobby would look like 4 years ago, 3 years ago, and then what we actually ended up building. Next slide. And the interior here as well, and then the final version. Next slide, please. And one more. I think as you looked at, for us, it was really the biophilia that made the difference. The trees, everything, and has just been such a calming influence on everybody. And again, great credit to ZGF, their landscape architects, for the design and the creativity to actually to pull this thing off. So we're just obviously couldn't be more happy with the results that we've done so far. So if you go to the next slide. This was the stadium stairs. And again, one of the concepts for here was, Grand Central Station, New York, a place that people would connect and see. And if you get to the next slide, then what the final result was. And we've seen that come to fruition. It's a temporary arrival. It actually works really well. It'll work great when we get the second phase open as well, but to have everybody kind of come right out in the center and have folks sitting in the stadium stairs waiting has been a nice temporary solution. The final one will be great as well, but if we can move to the next slide, what the final result is. And so the piano is not there yet, be hindering traffic movement. It'll eventually get there, though, at some point, but right now it's out of the way. So then if we can get to the last slide, then final result is. So again, just a sense of what we were trying to achieve many years ago. And again, great credit to the team for pulling it all together and having it turn out as really as well as it's turned out. We couldn't be more pleased. I think that's it for me, and I was going to turn it over to George here and to talk about the 2 contract amendments, and then we'll have one more as well, probably at least one more as we get close to the end. I'll let George take it from here.
Thank you, Vince. Good morning. Next slide, please. So today we're asking for 2 contract amendments, one to amend the ZGF contract to apply for construction administration, and the second for Burns and Mack for commissioning services. Both of these contract amendments were planned and in budget. We just have phased them out over time, so we're bringing them now when it's appropriate. Next slide. It's a big picture what's happening over the next year or so. Early next month, we should start structural demolition of the south node, so eliminate that node. The north node will follow about a month later, and it's about a 4-month process from starting structural demolition to getting the roof back over, or the new roof over that section. So on the south node, it's December to March, and the north goes then to the 1st of May. In this front half of the ticket lobby, all the terrazzo should be complete by the end of 1st quarter. And ultimately, this leads into our completion of phase 1 phase 2 on the south side in January and the north side in February of 2026. Next slide. So I want to show this image because really the big change that's occurring right now, besides what you can see in the ticket lobby, is gates C4 and D4, which have been removed from service now for probably 4 years now, if I figure out the math. It should come back in service before Thanksgiving. We're working with our IT team and the construction team next week to get them complete and then get them back to the airlines for service. Next slide. So here's a rendering, a picture of the phase 2 construction activities. The front half of it is the ticket lobby. What we're going to do is over the next, really the next week, where Southwest Ticket Island is, we should be able to get opened up before Thanksgiving. And then the other side where Delta is will be available for passenger circulation here in the next week and a half, but actually probably won't be extended and in operation until after New Year's because of the quiet period for the airlines. But that front half, we'll have all the terrazzo done by March. We'll have the completion of the ceiling towards the end of 25. The other half where the old nodes were, one of the big things is as we start structural demolition next week, or next month, we will need to shut down the nodes for passenger traffic. This will be lifting heavy pieces of equipment over the nodes. So we worked very closely with our airline partners and the ops team. So essentially what will happen is from 6 o'clock, it's about a 4-month process on each side. And about 40 days of that period, the bypasses will be shut down. What will happen is from about 6 o'clock at night on, any arriving flights that will then turn and take passengers to depart will land on either concourses or will depart at concourses C or D, depending on which side they are. Any flights that are the last arriving flight of the evening that will remain overnight, the passengers will exit either on B down to bag claim, or on E will exit to the front of the terminal right next to where the United lounge is today, to the front of the terminal, and we'll build some safety, some tents basically to keep them out of the weather and into the ticket lobby. That way we can completely shut that area off for passengers from a safety perspective, but allow construction to proceed. Next, yeah.
Just so people understand what you're talking about here. On this picture, the work's going to be done in those big red squares.
Correct. In
those windows. In order to access those squares, you essentially have to cross over the blue passageway.
Yep.
And that's the problem.
That is the problem. Phase 1, we basically came from the alleyway. So we never really impacted the passengers. We did impact operations, but not the passengers. Now we have to impact the passengers.
And so the periods that you're talking about, just so commissioners get we talked about it briefly. I think this picture is especially useful because you can't use those blue passageways to move passengers back into the main terminal. So in those windows of time over that 4-month period, for those evening windows, you essentially have to close the blue passageway off and get folks back into the arriving passengers back to the terminal in a different way. And so that's the disruption, inconvenience that we're talking about.
Inconvenience, yeah.
It's going to be bumpy, but should be safe.
Yeah. Yes. So sequences are in those in those 4-month periods. It'll start in right after Thanksgiving time. It'll start on B. It'll be about 15, 20 days as we do structural demo. Then it'll work over to the E side for the next month, and then it'll drop back and forth to B as we do structural steel work. Then go to E for structural steel work, and then finally the roof move-ins for the south side. For the B side, roof move-in should be around mid March, and the north side's around the end of April. So just flop back and forth. But never will we shut down both bypasses at the same time, because there's just not enough gates to allow us to do that. Big picture, Vince mentioned this is, I think, number 34. We anticipate at least one more upcoming. Big picture on schedule. Our intention is on phase 2 early, first quarter 2026. And at that point, we still have basically almost another year worth of work to do on the tail end of the project, really to get rid of those bypasses and get the gates back up. So there'll be some outside paving work that needs to occur to get the gates ready, repair all the concrete that has been damaged on the project. And then on the B side, C side, when Alaska moves into their new lounge, we built some new restrooms where the current Alaska lounge is. And the intent is to get all that done by the end of 26. Next slide, please. From a budgeting perspective, we're sitting right now with about $42 million in contingency. On this slide, that seems frighteningly low for a $2 billion project, but we spent a lot of money to date. We've got about $420 million left to go. So we've got about 10% contingency, which we feel is appropriate for the risk we have still going forward. From a risk perspective, the things we're most focused on would be safety. We want to make sure that continuing to focus on the worker safety like we did on phase 1, and don't start pushing people to meet a schedule unnecessarily. The second then will be schedule, which just ties in with safety. But if the schedule gets extended for any reason from a contingency perspective, we potentially have the risk of missing that summer season of 26 to do some of the outside work. So that'll just extend our general conditions. And the third one, and I'll say it's a biggie, but it's still the roof. The team, I don't want to say made it look easy, but there's an incredible engineering and construction activities around that, and that's still in front of us. Big picture for these 2 contract amendments. The design goal, the ZGF, will still maintain the 10%. The Burns and Mac is a 20%. And from a construction perspective, we're maintaining the 20% small business petition goal for the project. Next slide. So ZGF contract, as you said, we have phased this amendment, these construction administration amendments out over time. It's a difficult task to estimate how much construction administration will need, especially on a renovation project. So we've made the informed choice to, over time, phase these amendments out. And so this one, and probably one more for that final cost towards the end of 25. So the ZGF contract at the end of this will be about, for this one, will be about $218.5 million. And the next slide, for Burns and Mac, the same thing. Planned phased installation of the project. For commissioning, I didn't mention it before, basically the commissioning services are responsible for making sure that the systems and components are designed, installed, construction, operated, and maintained in an appropriate manner. And there's actually a lead requirement for us that we're asking Burns and Mac to assist us with, which will get us an additional 1 or 2 lead points. So their contract to completion will be about $8.8 million. Next slide. Staff ask for approval of these 2 amendments. Any questions?
Thank you, George. Thanks, Vince. Commissioners, questions? Commissioner Luther.
You just mentioned lead. Could you remind us what the lead objective was for the project?
It's gold.
It's gold. Thank you.
Mr. Administrator.
When it comes to commissioning, does any training take place that of anybody who has to actually run the facilities afterwards? Is that a part of the commissioning as well? Or is the commissioning pretty much siloed just to make sure we receive what we intended and it performs as intended?
Now, commission is more siloed to make sure what we both designed and installed met what we intended. But we do have big training requirements under the Hoffman-Skanska contract. And the actually commissioning makes sure tracks to make sure we do that.
Commissioner Johnson.
Yeah, 15 million is a really round number versus the 2.4 that feels like it has a BOE associated with it. So help me with the 15 million really round number.
It is. The Burns and Mac had a final price basically that's included doing the entire project. So they gave us a very detailed breakdown. From ZGF's perspective, we're just balancing into it about the $1.2 million as we finalize that contract amendment with it. And we'll make sure it is under 15. It won't be an exact $15 million amendment to them, but we want to make sure we had enough money to cover that final amendment. And then in reality, we'll have another one coming forward. But historically, what we have done with our amendments, they have been overestimated because it's hard to estimate that. So we've gotten extra months worth of support as we put forward.
Yeah. Commissioner and George just alluded to as well, sort of obliquely, if we underestimate, then we have to come back to you a second time. So we err on the side of slightly more in the permissions on contracts that are sort of still underway or rolling into, so that we don't have to come to you twice on the same contract. Yeah.
Luther.
Is there a benchmark or something that we, as we get into this mature state of the project, to a certain degree, it feels like maybe the vendors know they have us, right? So in terms of making sure that we are getting prices that are reasonable and not gouging, could you just talk to us a little bit about what sort of methods you use to sort of pressure test that we're getting fair pricing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so two things. From a construction perspective, most of those contracts are already set. There's very little that is still left to award. Maybe some of the stuff on the bypasses and removing the bypasses. Really, the construction side, there's about $1.5 million left to award. From a design perspective, it is a contract that is a reimbursement by hourly rate. So we make sure we've already signed and negotiated the hourly rates that get to increase basically by inflation per year, and that's it. Then it's incumbent upon us just to make sure that they're not gouging us with more hours than is necessary to do the work. So that's really where our control is on the hours.
Any other questions? Getting there. Hopefully not 34 more. All right. Can I get a motion and a second to approve the contract amendments? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. That concludes our business. Thank you, gentlemen. I just wanted to take a minute, colleagues, to recognize we're entering the holiday season, and there's a lot that goes on in our personal lives that impact us that we don't necessarily know about each other, and the same is true for staff. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank commissioners and to thank staff, and please convey to the rest of Port staff how much we value your willingness to volunteer to serve on the commission, value the staff and their hard work, despite everything that goes on in our world and everything that comes at us. And remember to give each other grace and a lot of love right now. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank you all for all that you do. And I hope that you have a very wonderful holiday season. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Meeting's adjourned.
Don't forget fried bread and tombstones.
Jeez, do the two go together?
So these were the